If you retire at 65 with about $1.5 million saved, how much can you really spend from that each year in retirement? The answer? It's probably not what most people expect. So how much, right? I mean, is it 50,000? Is it 75,000? Or could it even be $100,000 or more? The surprising part here is that two people with the exact same $1.5 million portfolios can end up with very different spending numbers. I mean, in some situations, the number really can be $100,000 or more, but it's usually not for the reasons that people think, and it's often not going to be forever either. Because the answer isn't just about the size of the portfolio. It also depends on when other income sources begin and how spending tends to change over time, and then taxes and several other pieces as well of the retirement plan. And once you start putting those pieces together, the number that people assume that they can safely spend oftentimes looks very, very different. Now, if we haven't met yet, I'm Ryan Kravitz. I'm a certified financial planner, and I help people transition from the working years into retirement and turn their savings into sustainable income. So before we go any further, let's at least put a rough answer on that question. For many retirees with about $1.5 million saved, a reasonable starting range might be around $90,000 to $150,000 a year in total retirement income. So that includes withdrawals from the portfolio plus income sources like Social Security. And the reason that the range is fairly wide is because a few key factors can really change the answer quite a bit. I mean, for example, things like whether you're single or if you're married. Do we have one Social Security check coming in or two, right? Also, when Social Security begins and how much you expect to receive, and whether you have a pension, and how the withdrawals from the portfolio are structured, and how taxes affect the income. All these factors can make a big difference in the outcome, which leads to an important question, right? I mean, why can two people with the same exact $1.5 million end up with very different retirement income? That's what the rest of this conversation is about. Now, many people have heard of the 4% rule, and if you apply 4% to a $1.5 million portfolio, you'll get $60,000 a year. Now, just as a rough benchmark, I mean, that's fine, but where people get tripped up is that a lot of people don't spend in a linear fashion throughout retirement. A lot of people aren't going to spend $60,000 and then increase that for inflation. So they're spending, let's say, $62,000 the next year, then maybe $64,000 the next year, and so on. The reality is that there's different income sources that will come into place, such as Social Security, perhaps a pension, perhaps a known inheritance, different things that are going to happen. And also, not to mention spending as to how we want to spend our money throughout our retirement years. Many people wanting to spend more in those earlier years. So there's a lot of other factors here really at play. And the other thing here is, again, as I said, 4%, just as kind of a rough benchmark. But for a lot of retirees that are 65 years old today, I tend to think that that's a little bit conservative. So rather than treating this 4% number as a strict rule, I think of it more just as a starting point for the conversation, because the real question isn't simply what percentage can I withdraw. The better question is, what is the portfolio actually being asked to do? And then how long does it need to do it? There's a big difference between saying I need this portfolio to support my spending for the next 30 years, and I need to increase my spending for the rate of inflation over that period of time, versus saying I may need income from this for a few years, maybe even significantly more for a few years, but then I'm going to need far less once other income sources start. And that's where a simple example helps. So let's say that someone retires at 65 with $1.5 million invested. One option is delaying Social Security until 70. And that would mean then for the first 5 years, the portfolio would have to carry that income load. So during those years, they might withdraw $100,000 or maybe even more. And, at first that sounds aggressive, but once Social Security begins, the picture changes dramatically. Suppose that benefit provides around $45,000 to $55,000 a year, and that income lasts for life. Well, now the portfolio may only need to produce around $50,000. And that's why focusing on just a single withdrawal percentage can oftentimes be misleading. In many retirement plans, oftentimes the portfolio simply carries more of the load earlier on and then less later. So at this point, it helps to pause for a moment and think about what actually changed. I mean, the portfolio itself didn't change. What really changed was how long it had to support the income by itself. And that's one of the key ideas in retirement income planning is that it's not just how big the portfolio is. It's also about what job the portfolio needs to do at different stages throughout retirement. Now, going back for a second, not everyone delays Social Security to 70. I mean, some people start closer to their full retirement age, which for many people is age 67, anyone born 1960 or later. And in that case, the portfolio might only need to carry that heavier load then for a couple of years. For some people, you might start Social Security right when you retire at 65. And maybe that benefit already provides $30,000 to $40,000 per year. So now instead of needing $100,000 from the portfolio, it might only need to produce $60,000 or $65,000. Again, same portfolio. It's just different income timing, different spending pressure on the portfolio at different times. Now, if someone withdraws $100,000 from a $1.5 million portfolio, that's about a 6.7% withdrawal rate. And that would be quite high if it had to continue for the next 30 years and also rise with inflation every year. But if that higher withdrawal only lasts for a limited window because you got other income that's beginning, then the picture can look very different. In some plans, withdrawals can even be significantly higher than that if for a short period of time. Because if later on you've got other income sources coming in, maybe the Social Security checks are starting, the pension, the known inheritance, right? Whatever it is, if you have that other income coming in, now you might drop your withdrawals to closer to 50 or 60,000 perhaps, and maybe that's closer to that 4% withdrawal range. So really, instead of just one fixed withdrawal rate, the portfolio is just simply doing more early and then less later on. Now, another factor that can change the answer is how long the money actually needs to last. Many retirement plans assume about a 30-year retirement. Someone retires at 65 and the plan is designed to last until 95. And in many cases, that's a smart way to think about it because longevity is certainly uncertain, but not everyone has the same health situation or family history. And if someone realistically expects a shorter retirement, maybe some known health issues, things like that, right? I mean, that can certainly influence how a spending plan is designed. I mean, at the same time, none of us knows exactly how long retirement's going to last. So, on the flip side here, most plans still need to leave room for the possibility of living longer. Another thing that surprises people too is how spending often changes in retirement. Spending rarely stays flat for 25 or 30 years. I mean, for many people, it's really those early years that are the most active. I mean, that's when people want to take the trips that they've been putting off all this time. They haven't been taking the vacation time at work or maybe too afraid to take it. And I've heard it all. And now you're retired. Now you have the time to be able to do this. And this is often when people really want to spend that money and go and do those things. Or maybe now they have time to be at home and remodel the kitchen and deal with different projects, or maybe help the kids or the grandkids or whatever it is, or maybe also too, maybe it's just that time. Maybe there's that big trip that you've been talking about for years that you just want to take. Whatever it is, there's all these types of spending goals, these spending things that things you want to spend money on. And so it's really common to spend more between 65 and 70 or even 65 and 75. And then later on, spending often settles down as people tend to slow down a bit. And of course, a good retirement plan is going to account for these different phases of life. Now, of course, none of this means that someone can just withdraw whatever they want whenever they want, right? I mean, markets still matter. There's different things we need to be paying attention to. And when it comes to markets, I mean, the biggest risk isn't the withdrawals here by themselves. It's really having to pull money from your investments that have just dropped early on in retirement. And that's why many retirement plans keep some money set aside in cash or maybe short-term bonds to cover spending needs during these market downturns. But if a significant decline happens, right as withdrawals are starting, that combination can still change then how the rest of your retirement plan unfolds. And that's why the first few years of retirement can matter so much as a part of this. Another factor here that affects spending is where the money is held. If most of that 1.5 million sits in traditional pre-tax accounts like 401ks or IRAs, then the withdrawals are generally, subject to ordinary income tax. So if someone withdraws $60,000, they may not actually get to spend the full $60,000. I mean, some of that's going to go to taxes. Now, if more of the money's in Roth accounts, well, those withdrawals are generally tax-free, which then means that more of what you withdraw is actually available to spend. And if some of the money is in a taxable brokerage account, well, then the tax treatment can be different again. So the question isn't just how much you withdraw, it's also how much of that withdrawal you actually get to keep after taxes, even with the same $1.5 million portfolio. I mean, two people could end up with very different spending amounts, depending upon how their savings are structured. So if you're looking at retiring at around 65 with about $1.5 million, the real question isn't just what's my withdrawal rate, right? I mean, the better question, as we talked about, is what is the portfolio being asked to do in those early years? And then what changes later on? When does Social Security begin? How much pressure is on the portfolio before that? What happens if markets are weak early on in retirement? And is the spending level that I want something that the portfolio needs to support forever, or is it just for a period of time? Because retirement income planning usually isn't about finding one perfect percentage. It's about understanding how the different pieces all fit together. And that's where thoughtful planning really makes a difference. Now, when you have all those pieces and they're coordinated well, people are often able to spend more comfortably and more confidently than they expected, especially in the years when they're the healthiest and most able to enjoy it. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.